Well, we are back again for another edition of the Detroit City Sportscast. Um, I am hosting once again this week. Garrett is not here, but lo and behold, I have Dorf back with me once again. I swear to God, it's a throwback to 2016. Um, Dorf, how you doing tonight, buddy?
Good, man. We went through the archives when we kind of went at last week. And it's like, all right, let me just scroll through the website real quick to see how far back it was. It was actually 2012 when I started with you.
That was
First
a
appearance, first appearance on the it was just the radio side at that point. There was no video. Was 2013, but as a just kind of writing back when text dominated the world. It's 2012.
and what were you discussing? Because it was actually a very, very good discussion that was being had then. What was
Yeah,
being discussed, Dorf?
the lead off, my first there, my first dip into the water here was I wrote a, 5 or 6 thousand word piece on why the steroid era was the best thing that ever happened to baseball. That arguably it saved dying sport, made it exciting again, and that we should stop pretending like for it was bad for the game. You can say it was bad for other reasons or whatnot, but we can all stop pretending here.
It was
But yeah, that was late 2012, early 2013 was the kind of the beginning of that. Then was
God, it
a regular contributor, helped to run the thing at one point until late 2019, early 2020.
was a like a completely different lifetime ago.
Heck yeah. Glad to be back. I'm glad, I don't know that I can do this on a weekly basis forever with the way life is, but it feels good to do this again. I appreciate
Yeah,
I
no,
appreciate you
it's
having me.
no, absolutely. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun talking to you. You obviously you have some good takes. I mean, if anybody hasn't tuned in yet, definitely tune into the to last week's episode where we basically went down, kind of like the off-season to-do list when it came to the Detroit Lions. And we do have a very, very we do have one Lions topic, quick topic that we're going to get to towards the end of the show tonight as well. But again, Dorothy offered up some good information last week regarding, just where the Lions sit when it comes to free agency heading into this offseason, things they need to do. You offer some good takes on the Jared Goff situation, contract situation. Possibly getting him restructured, freeing up some money. So I invite everybody to go and check that one out because, like I said, there's some good information there, and we are going to be getting into a very, very vital portion of the I'm going to go ahead and say the NFL season because the NFL season is all year now. There's no off season when it comes to the NFL. The NFL goes all year, and there's a very, very vital point coming up. So make sure you tune into that episode, last week's episode of the Detroit City Sportscast, and just take in everything that was talked about then. But this week, though, we got another good one this week. We're going to be talking about Tarik Skubal and the situation surrounding him with the Detroit Tigers, the contract situation surrounding him with the Detroit Tigers. Obviously, this is one of the bigger stories, not just in Detroit, but across all of Major League Baseball when it comes to what is going to happen when it comes to Skubal himself, who is arguably the best pitcher in baseball today. Two-time Cy Young Award winner, consecutive Cy Young Award winner in the American League, dominating again last year. And yeah, it's becoming a very, very, I guess maybe tense situation in some regard when it comes to the Tigers and Skubal and fans and kind of where things are going. But right now they are set to go to arbitration, and that's going to happen, Dorf, what, any day now, really?
Uh, the arbitration window where the actual hearings happen is like anytime between like February 5th and like the 20th, I think it is. I tried to do some searching right before we started here tonight to see if like it was public information exactly when Skubal was on the calendar. I wasn't able to find anything, but ultimately, I have no idea when he's going to be in that window. But based on kind of the lack of communication between the two sides, it's not like there's ongoing kind of negotiations to avoid the knockdown drag out hearing that's going to happen. Um, so I would think the MLB, if they're trying to maximize for the entertainment of the thing, they'll put it at the end.
That's what
Um,
I'm thinking too.
they'll put it at the end. The one kind of complicating factor where he might get shoved to the front is he's on the USWBC team, and those guys they report early, at least for the Tigers, a couple days early to pitchers and catchers. Um, report their spring training for the WBC guys. I think it's the 11th of February. So you are allowed to participate in spring training if those arbitration hearings and negotiations are still ongoing. It's just if they want to, for whatever reason, get that wrapped up before he has to take off to join the international competition there. Uh, you could see him put to the front of the line, but if you're trying to maximize the media fiesta, he'll be at the end. So
Yeah, and right now, I mean, I don't know, Dorf, you're going to get into some of this stuff, you know, regarding because I know that there's some stuff going on. I don't know if this is something that you're actually going to get into. I know it's something that we've talked about in the past regarding the John Heyman factor in all of this, because there certainly is, there may be a John Heyman factor in all of this that is kind of driving the news cycle, surrounding Skubal and Boris and the Tigers. But as where things stand right now, Skubal and the Tigers couldn't come to terms on a contract heading into next season. Um, Now he is still arbitration eligible, which means he is still part of the Tigers, and he is going to be a Tiger next season unless he gets traded. But the thing is, this is his final year of arbitration eligibility. And Dorf, you can go ahead and step in and correct me if I'm wrong at any point right now. Um, After this season, though, he is going to be a unrestricted free agent. In which case, obviously he's no longer arbitration eligible, and he is going to be a unrestricted free agent or a free agent if no new long-term deal is in place. Now, um,
the one kind
what?
of asterisk, if you want to put that next to it, is, and actually the not so casual Tiger fan kind of knows what this means right now, because ultimately he can still be qualifying offered, which doesn't make
Yes.
him a restricted free agent in the traditional definition. But the Tigers, if they fail to re-sign him for whatever reason, would be entitled to draft pick compensation. Depending on where the signing team picks or anything like that, it could be like a comp pick at the end of the first round to an actual first round pick. There's a lot of ifs and ands or ors depending on if they've signed him, if they have signed another qualifying offer, tied player, yada yada. Um,
Yeah, and I know there's like different
there's
like
a
categories too, like arbitrate or like A type players, B type players. I think
the old that's the old system.
is that
The
the
old
old
AB,
system?
yeah, that was the old system. The AB compensation. When the qualifying offer became a thing, that kind of went away. Um, but ultimately, like they will have to offer this year's qualifying offer is like 20 or 22 million bucks, 1 year 22 million. Very few guys see actually take it, but ultimately there's even still today free agents out there that have kind of been hamstrung by a qualifying offer that haven't signed yet for next year, because ultimately they're still very good MLB quality players, but the fact that I might also have to give up my first round pick next year to sign you kind of makes teams pause a little bit and depresses those values.
Dorf,
The
didn't Gleiber Torres sign his qualifying offer with the
Yeah, yes,
Tigers?
he did.
Okay.
Yes, he did. Because ultimately, Gleyber Torres, the Tigers traded extra or kind of overpaying compensation for Gleyber Torres over market for um, the guarantee that it was only going to be a 1 year. Because ultimately, I think their second baseman of the future is not Gleyber Torres beyond this year. And I actually, if you go into the archives of things I've kind of written for you since kind of this winter to now, I argue that I don't think he's the guy at the deadline this year. I think he kind of loses his job if he doesn't play out of his gourd at some point this year to either the combination of Colt Keith moving back to second base or MLB top prospect Kevin McGonigal making his major league debut at
Yeah.
some point in the middle of the year will push Torres to the side sooner rather than later. Assuming he doesn't, if he's playing out of his mind, that's a different story. But if you get the production you got last year, McGonigal has his job probably in July, and they'll probably look to move him potentially, or kind of put him in a more reserve, less playing time role. But let's not detour that far there. But the qualifying offer and a guy that accepts it's Gleyber Torres is a good example of that. But Skubal, if he sticks around this year for the entire year with the Detroit Tigers, they're going to tag him, even though that they have no hope of signing him, and no one is going to kind of block at that compensation when you're signing a free agent of Skubal's character. It's not going to cost Tarik Skubal any money. Nobody's going to even be worried about that. And if you're, the Dodgers, the Yankees, etc., bidding on him in free agency this time next year, that you don't care about that.
Sure.
Whereas a guy that's more middle of the road like Gleyber Torres, that was a boat anchor. He wasn't getting a multi-year deal with that tagged around him. So the Tigers kind of screwed him if he was looking for long-term security when they did that this offseason. But at the same time, they probably paid 50% to 75% over market value on the 1-year deal to kind of make sure it was only needed to be a 1-year deal.
Yeah, and right now where things kind of stand when it comes to Skubal and the Tigers, they were far apart. I mean, according to,
Yeah.
reports, and this may be where the John Heyman stuff comes in. Oh my God.
Holy
Were they were
crap.
they were they like were they like over like two hundred
We're th-
thousand dollars or wait, no, yeah. It was a ridiculous number that they were apart when it came to negotiation.
200,000 would be nothing. The
Oh yeah,
Tigers
yeah.
offered the Tigers offered 19. Boris and crew demanded 32.
Yes, and that was where they're at with
Yeah.
arbitration right now. Um I'm
Yeah.
talking about the number. There was a number being thrown around prior to all of the arbitration stuff, as far as like a gap between where the Tigers were and where Scuba was, which eventually led to um, where they stand right now when it comes to arbitration. I'm trying to remember what exactly that number was. It was some ridiculous number, like um, that. They were no you if it wasn't factory, you knew nothing was going to
So,
happen.
so I well, and like kind of an example of like kind of arbitration silliness under the Chris Ilitch regime was they went to trial last year with Casey Mize over 200 grand.
Yes. Yeah, that's
That's Mike Ilitch in his era had him and Dave Dombrowski had the philosophy of um, never put yourself in a position have to go to an arbitration trial and tell a guy he sucks and then expect him to be happy about having to play for you. Because ultimately, the arbitration process is an adversarial legal negotiation.
yeah.
It's both sides come and pitch um, plead their case to an independent arbitrator who is not a baseball person. It's usually a retired judge or other legal professional. And that arbitrator can pick one side or the other or split the baby. They can land in the middle. It's very, very, very rare that they don't side with one side or the other and split the baby here. You might see that come back out just with Skubal specifically because of how wide the gap is. But generally speaking, arbitration eligibility, arbitration hearings, you're arguing over one guy wants a 30% raise, the team only wants to give 20. They're arguing about that last 10%, which may be a couple $100,000. It could be a couple $1,000,000 depending on where the player is throughout their kind of arbitration eligibility cycle, let's call it. Um, you don't see $13 million Grand Canyon size gaps. You just don't. It wallops the previous. I don't remember what the previous record is off the top of my head, and unfortunately, I'm doing everything through a phone right now, so I can't just quickly type in and stealth research the previous biggest gap here. But it's the biggest gap between two sides filing in the MLB arbitration process in history. Um, and quite frankly, I I see both sides of it. I don't think the Tigers come across as cheap asses, but like they're if they follow kind of the logic tree that I think they did, it's not nutso for an opening offer. But usually prior to the having to file, there's a round of negotiations where ultimately the numbers move closer together. Um, it's not nutso insano. And quite frankly, it was at 80% or 90% raise year over year. So it's not like they weren't giving him a giant pay increase. But the fact that Boris wants 300, what's that work out to? Like 320%? Like, whoa, boy, slow down.
And the thing is too is there were
220%. Yeah.
yeah there were reports too that Boris kind of shut down the negotiation process.
Yeah, that's what I mean by that. There's a back and forth, a negotiation over, between November and January before the like filing deadline is, where teams will exchange numbers and they'll kind of say why, and then teams will do research and be like, and they'll be closer. But it sounds like based on what you're seeing media reports of, each team sent initial offer and that was it. That's where it ended.
And
They
that's where it
never they
ended, and that's where yeah, and that's where Boris kind of cut things off at, because again, there were reports that Boris didn't allow the Tigers to offer a counter to their to the 32 that the Boris and Skubal camp offered or were
Mhm.
countering the 19 million with. Um, and then they shut it down, and then reports got out that Tigers offered 19. Boris and Skubal are at 32, and that was it. They're going to arbitration now. Um, Obviously, this says a lot about kind of that relationship right now between the Tigers and Skubal in terms of it not being great, and further implying that if Skubal doesn't get traded, this is probably going to be the last season that he's a Detroit Tiger.
It's
Um,
gonna be it's Tarik Skubal will not be wearing a Tigers cap this time next year, regardless of what you do.
yeah.
Um, how many more games you want to see him play for you, largely is up to the organization. But this time next year, it's going to be a freaking Dodger. Who are we kidding?
um,
So
so and this is the thing. I know we one of our favorite words these past last episode and this one possibly is going to be leverage when it comes
mhm.
to Tarik Skubal, because Tarik Skubal heading into these negotiations, heading into this arbitration hearing, has a ton of leverage with him, considering he is coming off another Cy Young season, back-to-back Cy Young seasons, and you've got to assume that his recent performance is going to come into play when it comes to that leverage and when it comes to his side arguing why he deserves that much money. And I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, I don't know how the Tigers argue against that. I mean, I've got to assume that this is going to be a tough situation for the Tigers when going into that hearing, um, considering everything that Skubal has done so far in his career, and especially these past two seasons.
yeah, I mean you can't because ultimately you're not doing a long-term negotiation here when you're going to this hearing. You're debating over the compensation for next year only. So the whole, hey, I can't give him a 5-year deal because year 1 through 3 of his career, he missed a lot of time with the various arm ailments. Um, and hey, I can't justify the long term risk with how many miles are on the tires. You're arguing about 1 year only. So you can't even there's literally no cards that they can play to say, hey, I can't justify the long term risk here. I have to evaluate it on this year only.
Hmm.
The To your point, the leverage isn't the word I would use here. It's both sides of the word I would use here is gamble. Because ultimately you're putting your fate of this next year's compensation in the hands of a largely old man who doesn't know baseball. Probably it could be one of the arbitrator could be male or female. I don't know who they're going to get. But ultimately, the arbitrator is a usually a retired legal professional, usually a judge. Um, that the both the players union and the league itself they agreed to use this person. Um, so they're a known quantity. It's not like you pick a name out of a hat and you get Johnny Judge, who used to, be a municipal circuit court judge in Idaho or something. You have somebody qualified here. Um, it's not a leverage thing; it's a gamble because ultimately the Tigers filed what honestly would is not an unprecedented raise for a guy that had damn good back-to-back seasons. Generally speaking, the arbitration process until you're in the last year, like Skubal is supposed to be you have to be compared to other players with similar performance at similar steps through the arbitration process. That's what the CBA allows. So I if I'm if let's Spencer Torkelson, the first time arbitration eligible, the Tigers settled with him early. He doesn't have to go to our arbitration hearing this year. They agreed to terms on their contract for next year already. Say they hadn't, Spencer Torkelson is a first time arbitration eligible guy, would have had to say, hey, I am a first baseman, my first time through arbitration eligibility. These are my performance metrics. That compares well to contracts recently offered too. I'm struggling for a name here that would be absolutely comparable, but I don't know. This is not a good example. We'll just say, like, what did Freddie Freeman get his first time pass through arbitration?
Well, what about
That's what you're required to do is say, hey, Freddie Freeman got, I don't, and this is made up numbers, and Freddie Freeman is not a good comp for him, but Freddie Freeman got $7 million with a very similar career up to this point. His first pass through arbitration eligibility. Salaries overall have grown. I think I'm worth 8. The team counters back with that. I think a more fair comparison would be Ryan O'Hearn, who recently has spent time with the Royals, Orioles, and Padres, and he just signed somewhere, and I'm blanking on where that is this offseason. But Ryan O'Hearn got $3 million his first time through arbitration. With you have a very comparable career to him, so therefore we think you're worth $4 million because of salary inflation. And then they argue between those two goalposts. Guys that are in their last year, according to the CBA, are allowed to also compare themselves to recent free agent signings. So Skubal, pitchers of his caliber are getting high 30s to low 40s per year. And so if you're doing that and not just using kind of the arbitration guideposts for pitchers previously in their final year, if you look at recent free agent contracts amongst like Zach Wheeler or Max Fried or anybody like that, or Yamamoto or Yoshinobu Yamamoto, those guys are getting 30 plus million a year, where the $32 million filing is more comparable. So the Boris Corp and Skubal's camp have gambled that the arbitrator will weigh more heavily that the recent free agent signings are closer to a better comparison for Skubal's market and what a fair compensation is, rather than the Tigers, who offered the biggest 1 year raise and largest single year arbitration compensation for a pitcher ever, second highest. They paid the previous highest one to David Price his last trip through. Granted, that was forever ago.
Yep.
But David Price was previously the highest paid guy through the arbitration process, and he actually, funny enough, that paycheck came from, well, half of it because he got traded at the deadline that year. Um, was paid by Mike Ilitch Incorporated. So the Tigers are gambling that the arbitrator will use the MLB kind of the arbitration is the better comparison. The Boris Corp is gambling that the free agent signings will be the better comparison. And they've pushed all their eggs in those collective baskets. And so it's really going to come down to who can be more convincing to this legal professional that is the free agent person the comparison more relevant, or is the arbitration comparison more eligible? There's not really a leverage thing here because he can't sign anywhere else. This is the only place there's no he can't negotiate with anybody else yet. This is the only place he can go. So gamble is the better word than leverage. But if we're having this conversation this time next year, it's all about leverage.
And right now, too, what Boris and Skubal are asking, the 32 million, would be the highest um, contract through arbitration in MLB history. The
Barely
two
beating
com
out Juan Soto. Barely
Yep,
beating out Juan Soto.
barely being out Juan Soto in 2024 when he got 31 million,
Yep.
um, who beat out Shohei Ohtani, who got 30 million,
Mhm.
which I'm not quite sure what year that came in, but Soto's
That would
came
have
in
been
2024,
22 with the Angels.
which goes to show, though, that
23 with the Angels. Sorry. 23 off season with the Angels.
but those are two good examples, too, when it comes to how that impacts whether or not a player is going to end up returning to those teams. Because Soto and Ohtani both did not return to those respective teams. Soto did not go back to the Yankees. He ended up signing with the Mets. And then Shohei Ohtani ended up going, ironically enough, cross town as well and signed with the Dodgers. Um,
Mhm.
but beyond all of this, though, um, you know, there is another aspect to all of this, and that comes with the idea that the Tigers will move Tarik Skubal. I don't think it's not going to happen before arbitration happens. I don't think.
I don't think he's actually can be traded until this is settled at this
Yeah, I
point.
don't think. Yeah, that it wouldn't make sense for them, for him, for that being allowed. You know.
Yeah.
So what he ends up having to go to arbitration with an entirely different team. Yeah, that wouldn't make sense. But afterwards, it is still, you would assume, a very real possibility that the Tigers move Tarik Skubal at some point. Obviously, there's going to be a lot depending on how, kind of that first quarter of the regular season shapes up for the Tigers, how things happen through May, how things happen through June. Because when is the deadline door? Is it in early
July
July?
July July 31st, end of
Okay,
July.
July
It's like
31st.
it's like 2 weeks after the All-Star game.
Yep, and that's something else that changed too. Obviously, MLB got rid of, the waiver trade deadline and everything like that, which kind of sucked because I kind of enjoyed when teams were able
Yeah.
to. Uh,
Which minor platoon player that Bob Nutting is getting too cheap to pay for the rest of the year because he's out of it in Pittsburgh is gonna,
yeah,
touch a prospect you've never heard of that hasn't made it overseas out of the Venezuelan academy yet. Yes.
sure. But right now, I mean, baseball writers across the country have been foaming at the mouth when it came to, well, not foaming at the mouth, drooling over the possibilities that, Tarik Skubal gets traded. And we've heard, it seemed like throughout December, there were the Buster Olneys and the Ken Rosenthals of the world who were, throwing out rumors left and right. At one point, Tarik Skubal was on the verge of getting moved by the Tigers. At other points, it wasn't the case. Then, rumors, ramped up again during the winter meetings, and ultimately nothing came to fruition out of any of that. And you have to suspect, Dorf, the biggest reason why, or Paris, one of the biggest reasons why Tarik Skubal hasn't been moved is simply because of the price tag. And the notion that the Tigers are probably asking for the entire farm in in
And
exchange
the
for
only
somebody.
GM the only GM in baseball that is willing to routinely trade the entire farm is AJ Preller in San Diego. And well, he's done that like two off seasons in a row. There ain't any farm left.
Yeah, and that and
They
that
need to
and
reload.
exactly, and that's the thing too. Um, you can
And
only
they're
do that for
broke.
yeah, you can only
And
do
quite
that for
frankly,
so long.
they're in dire fight. The Padres, after their last owner Peter Siler has died, they're in pretty bad financial straits. He kind of did the like what Mike Ilitch did, and kind of the late 2010s and early 2010s there, where he spent like a drunken sailor regardless of his team's profitability because he wanted to win one before he died.
Hmm.
And both, unfortunately for both those owners, both Siler and Ilitch, it didn't work out that way. But now the Siler family and actually the Ilitch family have kind of taken over running, and the children who have kind of inherited the teams want to actually make sure they make money,
Sure.
so are actually putting financial restraints back on the organization, which is largely why you've seen the Padres be non-players in the last couple of free agency periods, is because they can't afford to be anymore because they're not willing to take a financial loss on the season to go on a spending spree every off season like they were in like 21 and 22, for instance.
And when it
So
comes to the,
yeah,
I was going to say when it comes to the Tigers too, they're in a very they're in a different situation. Because the thing with the Tigers is they're going to be good this upcoming season. By all
yeah.
account, they're going to be good this upcoming season.
Well, I mean
And
the Central's going to be the weakest division in baseball,
sure.
probably. If not, I mean, the best case scenario is going to be the fifth best division in baseball, competing potentially with the NL Central as the softest division in baseball. But it's going to be a two-way race at the bottom there. And so if they just don't play absolute hot garbage, hot ass baseball in the first couple months of the year, they're in it. Like there's not much they could do to absolutely blow it. Um, Unless, of course, they come out and go, win only a third of their games over the first 2 months. They're in it. So sorry, I cut you off. Go
No,
ahead.
no, that's what I was gonna that's what I was gonna say too, is the Tigers don't have to trade Tarik Skubal. And
Nope.
in fact, you could make a very good argument that it wouldn't be in their best interest to trade a
Nope.
guy like Tarik Skubal at this point because they're not a bad team. They're not they're not a team that is, you know, multiple seasons away from being competitive because this is a team that is
Competitive now.
competitive now and a team that, I mean, throughout most of last season, when they had that massive lead in the AL Central, they were talked about as a team that is one of those teams that could win a World Series. And you've got to suspect that heading into this season with a guy like Tarik Skubal in your rotation, a guy that is, almost a guaranteed win every fifth day,
Mm-hmm.
is, that's a team that is going to be another team that's talked about when it comes to winning a World Series. Obviously, things change though. Things change, and if the Tigers come out and look awful to start the season, then yeah, Tarik Skubal is going to be a guy that is going to be traded. And the unfortunate thing for Detroit is, yeah, they're probably going to wish in hindsight that they traded him during the offseason because at this point
No,
right
no.
now, um, you got to expect, okay, once the season starts, Skubal's trade value goes down. And I'm not saying it goes down because he's becoming a worse pitcher. Not at all. It goes down because his time with that new team is limited. And
Yeah, so
teams,
the
I just
number of games they can impact goes
exactly.
down. So
Exactly. I mean, a team is going to pay much more for a Tarik Skubal to have him for the entire season than they would half the season and potentially the playoffs. Now, obviously, if they go on and they win the World Series, all bets are off and it makes everything worth it. Um, but you still have to suspect, though, too, that still, if the Tigers decide to trade Tarik Skubal at the trade deadline, they're still going to get a pretty nice return for him, given he is still pitching well throughout the season. That's another factor
yeah.
too. If he's not pitching well this season, then yeah, that's going to affect the value as well.
So like ultimately the Tigers rest of the Tigers off season and especially some of the like minor rumors you've heard over the last week tell me that they're in win now mode. You don't sign a 36 or 37-year-old high leverage relief arm like Kenley Jansen if you're not trying to win this year.
Mm-hmm.
You sign a guy like Kenley Jansen for $5 million with the hopes you can flip him at the deadline if you're not planning on trying to compete this year, or you're just barely dipping your toes in the water. You don't pay market value for that guy if you're not trying to win now. And part of the reason I think you've had a kind of a tepid offseason since then is because I think the Tigers saw how far apart they are in negotiations here, and they could have a $13 million unplanned expenditure here. If you were sitting in, the front office with Scott Harris and the business side and their baseball nerds, let's call it, kind of planning your fiscal 26 budget and you're on player payroll this year, I bet you would have penciled in a 22 to $24 million comp for Tarik Skubal. If Boris and crew filed at like 26, the Tigers filed at 19, I bet you they would have met the middle somewhere around 23 or 24, and everybody would have been happy. And that was probably a realistic number that they had in their budget. But the holy shit, we might actually have to pay $32 million to this guy. That gap between those guys is a pretty decently high level position player free agent or a kind of number 3 starter or high end leverage reliever type compensation. Or you can chunk that up into smaller bits to hand out to other players on the free agent market. But you're hearing kind of over the last couple of weeks, kind of that second tier of like starting pitchers, like Zach Gallen, for instance, coming off kind of a bad year, but a guy that the Tigers could take like a 1-year prove it deal on, potentially for a good value here. They're not really coming out full force and actively pursuing him because the money they could be able to give to him is likely tied up until the Skubal situation is brought to an end. And they're not going to trade him at this point in the offseason either because the Tigers have probably asked since the beginning for, I want multiple guys off your big league roster because I am still in win now mode. My winning window is still today. I can't take the compensation and prospects because I need them ready now. I need to be able to win now and not waste. And we're going to less of an extent, we're going to be having the same conversation in another 18 months, probably about Riley Green. And what are they going to do with him as far as compensating for him? We're going to have the same conversation. And until that is kind of certain, that money's kind of tied up. They're not able to kind of go steal a value deal on like a Zach Gallen or a buy low on a bounce back candidate like Jordan Montgomery. Or I still don't think that you want Framber Valdez because, despite the AJ Hinch connection from their time together in the Astros, that guy cost himself probably $100 million by crossing up that catcher. Oops, dumbass. Because of that one moment of frustration, you are now labeled forever as a clubhouse cancer. Whether it was that you're the nicest guy and the Sean Casey reincarnate, the mayor of the locker room, you could be the greatest guy ever, but you're forever tarred with that. But you could potentially go dip your toes in and get a guy like that to, hey, I understand you haven't gotten the 5 or 6 year deal you want here, but we'll give you a 1 year deal at a fair dollar, and you can try this again next year. No hard feelings. They're not able to play in that market and get a guy like that potentially who's still dangling out there, or even Eugenio Suarez for that matter. Another guy who could fill a nice hole, right-handed pop, plays in okay third base, old friend. You could bring him back, and the guy's only hit 150 home runs over the last 4 years. So you know, sucks. You could go get him for 10 or 12 million bucks for 1 year, and then if it doesn't work out, you can shed him at the deadline. But until this is rectified, the kind of the rest of the Tigers offseason here, where they could look to add some big league veteran talent on good kind of affordable deals, is kind of prisoner until this is final.
And I know,
And they're not going to trade him. And like, here's the thing. So they're asking for multiple big leaguers, but nobody's going to give that up at this point in the offseason cycle because, pitchers and catchers report in like 10 days, 10, 12, 14 days, depending on the team. You don't have time to replace him if you trade guys off your big league roster. So that's not happening. Compensation is going to be limited to minor leaguers, and the Tigers aren't interested in that. So he's not going anywhere at this point.
not to mention too, for all the reasons that the Tigers have, shouldn't trade him given where they are as an organization and how competitive they're presumed to be this upcoming season. Um, there's a lot of teams out there too that are looking at the situation right now with Skubal and the Tigers and seeing just how much it's seemingly deteriorated that they're probably thinking as well, okay, why would I go out and give up multiple big league players when I can just enter in, especially if you're the Dodgers or the Yankees, when I can just wait it out this season, I'm still going to be competitive. Those two teams are still going to be competitive this year. The Dodgers
Yeah.
can still win the World Series without Tarik Skubal this year. And just
Yeah.
be like, okay, well, I'm going to hold on to all my guys and just outbid everybody in
Next year.
next year's
Yeah.
offseason. So,
Or worse comes to worse, I have a dearth of pitching injuries again, like the Dodgers always do, and I need reinforcements at the deadline. If the Tigers are selling at the deadline, they'll take prospects.
they'll
I don't
take
have to give
prospect.
up a
Yep,
guy. I don't have to
exactly.
give a guy off my big league team. Um, and that's when you kind of turn over your dearth of minor league prospects to kind of go get that compensation for that
Yep.
mid year reinforcement. But I mean, at this point in the cycle, if he's going to get moved before kind of deadline season or hot stove season, whatever you want to call it, like no GM is going to come out and offer and say, "I'll give you my everyday center fielder and my number 3 starter for this guy, plus a prospect or two." Because quite frankly, that's what the Tigers would demand, and like that's not going to happen. Because, quite frankly, the center field market is barren. I mean, Harrison Bader is a part-time player, and he just got signed this week for 20 million bucks over 2 years. And guy is not great.
Hmm.
And that was the premium guy left after Cedric Mullins signed this offseason. And I wouldn't even call Cedric Mullins premium. There's not even like a C tier player left on the market, so you can't go. Then you're stuck trading for somebody else's big league center fielder, and that's not going to happen either. Um,
Dorf, go ahead, finish your thought.
no, it's he's not getting traded now. The Tigers, I still think, have the money, regardless of what side of the. I have no insider knowledge here, not at all. Have the money if they end up on either side of that equation, to afford to pay him throughout the next season. It's just if they settle at that 32, that means they're probably done for the offseason. They're not going to go steal another guy for a below market rate who hung out there too long trying to open out for a multi-year deal. They're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to afford that probably. But if they settle for lower than that, you might be able to see him go out and the week that spring training starts, go and steal a Zach Gallen or a Eugenio Suarez or some similar caliber player, a big league regular, who's had some bad luck this offseason searching for a multi-year deal.
I wanted to ask you, kind of moving along here, why don't you think an extension was signed? Why don't you think an agreement was come to terms between these two sides? Because you look at things and you look at the makeup, when you kind of take a step back and you look at the makeup of Major League Baseball. I mean, this is a league that doesn't have a salary cap. When you
Mhm.
look at the tires itself, I mean, Chris Ilitch is one of the more wealthy owners in the sport. When you look at market size, Detroit as a metropolitan media market is top 15 in the entire United States. So and that's why I always think about, when people talk about, big league market or big markets and small markets, and people kind of refer to Detroit as a small market. I'm like, well, that's not necessarily the case. I always think of Detroit as a big market,
Well, it's
considering.
because those making that judgment live in New York City and only look at the population of the city proper, and
Sure,
yeah, the
they
600,000 or 700,000 people that actually live in Detroit are not the ones that buy tickets largely. So
yeah.
they all live in the burbs, and if you
It,
expand it out to the metro areas and look at media markets, like you say, instead of just city populations, they're they're not small. They're not upper tier elite like Los Angeles or New York,
sure,
but
sure.
they ain't small.
No, it's not small at all. And I just want to know why you think, because this is when you look at Tarik Skubal as a player too, he is one of the best pitchers to have ever pitched in the Tigers organization. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Especially, recently. I mean, when you think about the best pitchers the Tigers have ever had in the modern game, two guys that come up are going to be Justin Verlander and Tarik Skubal, two guys they've had over the past 20 seasons. Um, but why don't you think a deal was never reached between these two guys or between these two camps? Um, because you would almost think it would be a no-brainer. Yeah, you want to get a guy like Tarik Skubal signed long term. This isn't a guy who is, in his early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy who's been, dominant for you. This isn't a guy who has, had to deal with, a bunch of injuries throughout his career. So why don't you think these two sides were ever able to come to an agreement on a long-term deal to keep Skubal here in Detroit, possibly
So
for the rest of his career?
I'm going to lean on. So I'm a regular consumer of the. It's called Nothing Personal with David Sampson. David Sampson was the team president of the Florida Marlins and the Montreal Expos for a long time, like 20 years in those various roles, and now he does a daily podcast about sports business. And he has a really, really good take on essentially Scott Boras. He calls him Boras because as a veteran of many negotiations with said man, he's kind of got that insight. And it's not a MLB insider like a John Heyman, Ken Rosenthal, Buster Only, etc.,
Sure.
who essentially are mouthpieces for whisper campaigns for agents all the time. It's a guy who's been on the opposite side of the negotiating table with Scott Boras. All the baseball people hate the guy because he's a jackass. They don't like dealing with him, and they never have. But the way Boris was largely able to kind of act the way he's acted is because he was able to largely sweet talk boomer owners. He would circumvent the baseball people he was supposed to negotiate. And we have a perfect example of this with like the Prince Fielder contract that he signed with the Tigers. Victor Martinez goes down, ACL injury in the offseason. Shit, he's going to miss the whole year. That's a lot of offensive production we got to replace on short notice. A guy like Scott Boras called Mike Ilitch and essentially sweet talked him into, hey, I got this guy. He's going to save your franchise. He's going to, you know, wouldn't he look great, following the footsteps of his dad? And they go around the baseball people and sweet talk the owner into making an illogical decision. And this kind of crop of owners don't put up with it. They don't do it. They don't take his call. They have baseball people. They have baseball people for that because ultimately that was back still kind of the end of the era where baseball teams were built on the eye test and
Yep.
the sending out the scouts to do the 80-20 scouting scale and yada yada. And it was very early in the analytics era. And if anything, they were an information point at that point, not the only kind of deciding factor in how you built a baseball team. And so that kind of shit doesn't work anymore. The only way he gets premium free agents, premium contracts is because they were going to get it anyway, with or without him. He doesn't he can't, he's lost his charm and ability to kind of work the owners in the background to kind of override their baseball people. That's kind of a summary of David Sampson's take on it. And I think that makes great sense. That Chris Ilitch didn't play the game like his dad did. And Scott Harris thinks it's hilarious. Probably. That's all you can do is laugh. That's not an indictment of Scott Harris as a baseball executive. Because quite frankly, you're negotiating with a bad faith player here at this point with Scott Boras. You could have offered Tarik Skubal something about like $40 million a year over 8 years or 10 years or whatever, and he would have just used it as the opening point, which is fair market value. Zach Wheeler is a very good comparison, especially with the arm health and kind of dominant performance. He got $42 million a year, somewhere in that ballpark. 42, 45 million a year over the better part of a decade is not a bad comp for him. It's not a bad place to land. They could have offered that, and Boras wouldn't have taken their call if it was less than 60.
And
And
if it was 60, it would have been,
it would have been 70.
it would
And
have
if
been
it was
70,
70, it
yeah.
would have been 80. Yeah. There would have been no good faith negotiation here. So unless, of course, you can convince Skubal to fire his representation, you never were going to have a good faith negotiation prior to his free agency. So I don't think that players don't hire Scott Boras anymore if they don't want that sort of representation. They hire them because they want that. If they don't, they sign with the other myriad of agencies, and like David Sampson even talks is like the best agent in baseball, and everybody kind of knows it and actually gets through good faith negotiation as guys more compensation than they otherwise deserve is Joel Wolf, for instance. Joel Wolf is mostly in the news this week because he's Yu Darvish's agent, so you might have heard his name here of late and kind of handling the whole like is Darvish retiring, is he not thing. But Joel Wolf is handled other premium clients, and he's largely regarded by the baseball people to be the best guy. You don't hire Boras if you don't want exactly what you're getting because there's better guys out there.
Yeah,
So
he has a reputation.
yeah, you don't. This is exactly what you wanted because you think it's best for you, and that's your gamble. So there was no. This is not an indictment of the Tigers. This is not a unique handling of kind of Skubal's career and contract progression with them. There's not another team in baseball, even the Dodgers, that wouldn't have handled it this way. There's no way
Yeah.
that anybody he was never signing a contract before he hit free agency, and so why waste your time?
Yeah. I mean, it does. It makes a lot of sense. I'm just laughing though, thinking about that call that Boris made to Mike Ilitch trying to sell Prince Fielder to him because I'm sure it didn't take much, especially
No,
too because
hey,
Mike
remember
Ilitch won.
his dad was pretty cool, Mike. Wouldn't he look great in your uniform? Fuck yeah, he would. Send it. How much is it going to take? 9 years, 218 sold. We solved a 1 year problem with a 9 year solution. Woo!
I could just picture him be like, you know what, do you have Dave's number? Because I don't have my checkbook on me. He has my checkbook right now, so go ahead and give him a call.
Give him
And
a call.
yeah,
Yeah, how do you imagine that conversation? Mike calling Dave. Hey, Dave. Get out your book. We need to write a check to Princefield at 9 years, 218. And Dave just being just like, what the fuck, man?
All right.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I already worked it out with Morris. It's all good, man. Um, and you plug that 1 year stopgap with a 9 year. But ultimately, Fielder had a nice run with the Tigers until the injury bug kind of, and ultimately the collapse of the kind of Tigers winning window there led him to exiting town and going to the Rangers. And unfortunately, the neck injury kind of cost him the end of his career.
You know what,
But
Dorf?
they
You know what,
got what they
Dorf?
paid for when he was there.
Sure. One little thing, a throwback for us. I
Yeah.
think you were there. We were actually
We were
recording
on
an
the air
episode.
when that
We were
broke.
on the air when it broke that the Tigers traded Prince Fielder to the Rangers for Ian
We
Kinsler.
we were on the air when
Yep.
that broke. I remember. Yes, we were.
Yep. Yep. That was I
Now that
think that
you
was like
say
the
that, I remember was sitting on across from you in that studio you had in
yep,
your outbuilding
garage.
there.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And
God. And I
I
was I was sitting there scrolling Twitter, and holy shit, it happened.
I
I
want to say
remember
like
that.
for all the episodes we've ever recorded, I that was like the only time that
Breaking
something
news,
massive broke when we were actually
because we were
recording something.
because we were recording usually between 7 and 10 p.m.
Yeah, yeah, and it happened. And it happened.
Yep.
Um kind of getting to the end of this Scooble stuff though. Um how do you look at the Tigers front office right now? Um because I think I'm hoping when people listen to this episode, they kind of change their thought process when it comes to the Tigers because and I'm going to be completely fair right now. I don't like Chris Ilitch. I don't like him as an owner, but I think you make some good points though when it comes to their side of things and how they're approaching this and how they're approaching this from a fair standpoint. Um, and of course, people are going to argue that they're gonna have their reasons for why maybe it's not. But when it comes to the direction of the Tigers, what direction do you think that they go in? The front office in particular, um, in the years after Tarik Skubal. I mean, is this going to be a point where they take a massive step back? Is it going to be a point where they take a very minimal step back? Or is this going to be one of those instances where they're going to move on from it and do everything that they can to make themselves better? Because, again, you've got to suspect that even without Tarik Skubal going into next season, not this upcoming season, but the following season,
Mhm.
given the division, they're still going to be a relatively good team.
Mhm. So ultimately, the NL Central, AL Central is not going to be. There's no like giant team ascending. Like you remember the kind of years that the Royals won the World Series. It was like they
Yes.
were really bad for a long time, and then that young core of like Hosmer, Moustakas, Alex Gordon, all those guys were kind of maturing at the same time.
Yep.
There's not another one of the organizations that has that. And if anything, the one that's closest to having kind of that like elite prospect core coming to maturation is Detroit.
It's the Tigers. Yep.
Uh, they have the really, really elite upper end talent in the farm system. It may lack depth, but like ultimately, you've got four guys in the top 50, and two of them are probably going to be on your team by the end of the year.
Hmm.
And the other two are not far. Well, Bryce Rainier is probably a ways away still because he's now going to be. This is age 20 season. He missed most of the last year with an injury and hasn't played above A ball. But the other three are probably going to get playing time down the stretch for you, whether you're in or out.
Hmm.
Because because they're going to force their way onto the big league roster with their performance.
Sure.
The um, the Tigers, you will take a step back in the pitching department. Doesn't matter. Tarik Skubal is going to put you in a position to win 25, under the assumption he makes 30 or 32 starts, somewhere in there. 25 times, assuming your bullpen isn't absolute hot garbage, he's going to win the game for you. 4 more times, he's going to, leave in an adequate situation where you might have to battle. And then maybe the remaining 3 or 4 there, he's going to lay some turds, because every pitcher does, throughout the course of a year. But at the same time, you're not going to get a 25 games of absolute domination out of anybody. There's like one other guy that's that elite, and he happens to play in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And you ain't getting him either. So the guys that you're signing, kind of that next tier that is available, and you could hope to develop, put you in kind of that elite dominate pole position, let's call it, in 20 games, not 25. And you're going to have to find a way to scrap together those kind of that 5-win gap between him and, it's not even replacement level if you think about it from WAR, but average number 1. That's the gap between Tarik Skubal and the league average number 1. And you're going to have to find 5 more wins there without that ability. Granted, you can do that with depth. You can do that with high-end talent. There's many ways you can skin that cat, but that's going to hurt. And you're going to have to find a way to win, win in different ways on the pitching front. And please, for the love of God, don't make it pitching chaos, because as we saw last year, that ain't sustainable.
Yeah. That's the other thing. I think, God, I'm if you take any good news from this offseason and what the Tigers have been able to do, I'm so glad they were able to get AJ Hinch signed long term. So,
Yep.
I mean, that is a good thing. But yeah, so what next, I guess, for Tarik Skubal? I guess they're gonna go to this arbitration. They're gonna, get that figured out, and Tigers fans should just enjoy the ride one last season with Tarik
I
Skubal.
mean, if you're not a Tigers doomer, you wanted to be on the team the whole year, get QO'd, qualifying offered at the end, and wish him, thank you very much. Now, that doesn't mean you don't try and engage in the negotiations, but you're not going to be a realistic player in it. And as the Tigers' organizational philosophy is, you're kind of seeing as a reflection of Chris Ilitch is, they're kind of tipping their toes in the middle. They want to sometimes act like big market, sometimes act like poverty franchise. And when you don't kind of pick a cardinal direction, you just get to be bad at kind of both. You have like teams like the Brewers and the Rays who perpetually grow players and sell them before they, are out of ownership, and perpetually recycle and get guys on the way up and kind of win at the margins. That's their business model. That's who they can afford to be, so they have to. You would then have teams like the Dodgers in the extreme, or even like the Padres or Giants, for instance, who are big market. And they act like it. And if they have holes, they pay to fill them with free agents. They don't rely on minor leaguers to kind of fill in that gap, generally speaking. At least minor leaguers, guys coming up through the system are not their only choice, their only option. They have to fight their way onto big league rosters rather than be kind of given jobs. And that's the way they roll. And you can be wildly successful with that. And it's just a really expensive way to run a baseball team. And then you get like the Tigers, for instance, who just kind of try and be both, sort of, but you're not really you can't spend big, but at the same time you don't develop them and sell them and restock. You don't do that. And so you just kind of get to hang out at the middle here, where you never ever go all in, and you're never kind of burning it down. And if that's the way Chris Ilitch wants to run his baseball team, kind of what we've seen over the last couple of years is going to be what we should get used to. Thankfully, as sports fans, it kind of hurts your soul to kind of be on the other end of that, where it's the like the Brewers or the Rays, where they're going to churn. No, nobody stays with you for more than 3 or 4 years. And they're going to churn that roster like crazy, and you don't get to fall in love with people where you spend your entire portions of your life rooting for the same guys. And so that kind of sucks. It sucks to be a fan of those teams, but they kind of get away with it because they're perpetually good.
Hmm.
The Rays had a bad year last year, but ultimately they've been damn good for a decade. The
Yes.
Brewers, despite like no investment, have been damn good for a decade. Um, then you have that kind of same philosophy done poorly in like whatever the Oakland A's or Philadelphia or not Philadelphia, Oakland or Vegas or Sacramento, whatever they call themselves today, and Miami. Like those are the opposite ends where they try and run that sort of churn and sell sort of philosophy. They don't execute well.
Hmm.
And then you not only have nobody to fall in love with, but you suck.
Yeah.
So, and then you have the even more outliers, Bob Nutting in Pittsburgh, who just doesn't give a shit. So, um, you can kind of be in the stuck in this middle tier, like yourself, the Tigers, the Cincinnati Reds, the White Sox, for instance, are kind of in this boat where they could afford, they just kind of like hot and cold, don't have a guiding principle or a philosophy how we run the team, where you just kind of get to hang out in the middle.
They're hybrid
And
teams.
right. And like that's fine and all. Like you're going to be consistently pretty good, but you're never gonna feel dominant, and you're never gonna feel terrible until you bottom out. And I don't think you're gonna see Chris Ilitch and crew run it like his dad did, and that's evident. He's been in charge for essentially 10 years now.
Yeah.
Um, he's shown us who he is, and it is what it is. And it's not an indictment of Scott Harris as a baseball executive if he's carrying out his boss's wishes to kind of just hang out in the middle.
Hmm.
But it sounds very black pilled, doomer, here. But they have an opportunity. They're going to be playoff contenders for the next couple of years, whether Skubal's with them or not, just ultimately because of the softness in the division and the lack of an ascending team and who else they still have under control.
Sure.
So you're going to have a little bit of an extended window here, no matter what you do, essentially. Enjoy it. Because we saw how bad it was for 10 years after kind of the I don't want to call it a dynasty because they never won anything, but that nice run they had from the late 2000s to through the mid 20 teens, that kind of 8 or 9 year run there where it was fantastic.
Hmm.
That's that, Mike Ilitch spending like a drunken sailor. That's not coming back, guys. And not under this family's ownership. And we need to adjust to those kind of parameters and kind of set our expectations accordingly. It doesn't mean we have to like it, but this whole thought that the arbitration offer is Illich being a cheap ass is not, it's not fair. And here I am white knighting for a billionaire, but you know, that's not fair. They made a good sound baseball offer on the gamble that the arbitration precedent was going to be more important than the free agent precedent of the process. And the Boris Corp went on the other side. And that doesn't make them cheap. That makes Scott Harris and crew good stewards of the budget they have. Um, you're just not going to have $250 million payrolls. You're just not going. It's just not going to happen, guys. So get used to it.
Um, well, to kind of put a bow on everything now, I mean, just keep an eye out for things. Obviously, this is something that could happen, um, within the next week, 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, and what happens? I mean, it's going to be a highly publicized arbitration case or arbitration hearing within the Major League Baseball world. So, yeah, stay tuned for that. Um, Moving along here, we're going to close out two quick hits here to finish out the show. Kind of piggybacking off of our Lions talk from last week, Dorf. Um, Big hire actually for the Lions the other day. Um, Getting Mike Kafka, former interim
Hmm.
head coach of the New York Giants, coming in for the Detroit Lions to fill a high level offensive role, quote unquote. Um, Nobody knows what that quite is yet. Scotty Montgomery is or will be interviewing for a coaching job with the Baltimore Ravens, not head coaching job, but
A
um,
coordinator job, yeah.
coordinator job
Offensive
under
coordinator.
under Jesse Minter's new staff. So I guess the thought is maybe he could be moving into that role if Scotty Montgomery um, uh, leaves the organization. If not, he could be, working alongside Drew Petzing as, kind of like a dual-headed monster running that offense. But again, Mike Kafka, good hire, my opinion. What do you think, Dorf?
So he's probably going to slot in as the QB coach because ultimately I haven't heard if other guys are on the way out, and I doubt it. Because if like the title of offensive coordinators is Drew Petzing, obviously they've had a pass game coordinator and a run game coordinator for the last 2 years. Those have been filled by offensive line coach Hank Fraley running the run game and former Stanford head coach, and I forget what other position coach job title he technically had. David Shaw
David Shaw,
was the
yeah.
pass game coordinator last year after a title was previously held by Trevor Engstead, who went to the Jets with Aaron Glenn and actually got fired this week.
Hmm.
Um, so it's probably going to be something like QB coach, pass game coordinator. I know Shaw's interviewed for other jobs here this year. So he may not be back on staff because he's going to get poached for a coordinator job or an elevated assistant head coach or something like that. So they've kind of already elevated the other guys to the like offensive coordinator junior roles, um, where you'd see like Mike Kafka slot in. What you likely could see him do is, especially if Scotty Montgomery leaves, it's the QB coach slash associate head coach, which Scotty Montgomery is running backs, or sorry, wide receivers and associate head coach. You might see him do something like that to get him the more than an assistant title that rumor of high level job could entail. So that's probably what that would be, assuming Montgomery leaves, or it could just be the QB coach.
Yeah.
As he did play QB in the league a little bit, mostly as a backup after I believe playing his college ball at Northwestern, if I remember correctly. So um, you know, uh, he's been a coordinator in the league. He's been the interim head coach there. He's going to have valuable experience there, kind of as a get another brain in the room, let's say. Um, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. It definitely kind of shut up, a lot of the bitching and moaning that Lions fans had for not going out and
Oh
signing.
my God! Why not Mike McDaniel?
I mean, bring in Mike Kafka. I mean, that alone was worth it. If it was
I
able to
mean,
kind of,
quite frankly, if you don't end up with Petzing as your OC, like Kafka being your OC is not a because he interviewed for it too.
Mhm.
Wouldn't have been a bad hire either. So, like, the fact that you were able to wrangle him for some other job is not a bad place to be because very well Kafka likely would have gotten or would be getting another coordinator job in the next year. Even if necessarily if it's not with you, it might be with somebody else.
I heard a clip too that, and I hate saying this because I despise 97.1, but TJ Lang,
Hey,
I thought, uh,
since I moved out of the market, I haven't listened to it once.
yeah, I didn't listen to it. This was a clip that I saw like on Twitter,
Hmm.
that they posted. And I thought TJ Lang made a good point when it came to Mike McDaniel. Somebody going into an organization with that, um,
Oh, I saw this one. Yep. I know
yeah,
where you're
where
going.
he
Yep.
was, with that type of pull, that type of notoriety, um, was more than likely going to be a guy that was going to want to bring in a lot of his own head coaches, or not head coaches, but a lot of his own staff,
Yeah.
which, if you're a guy like like Dan Campbell, who is, spent a lot of time um, kind of making up his staff, forming the staff, creating the staff himself. You got to suspect that that's going to be a bit of a turnoff for you, bringing in a guy that's going to kind of, change things potentially to that magnitude.
Mhm.
When it comes to a staff, because that's a if you're a guy like Mike McDaniel, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and if you want to bring in a bunch of your own guys, that is, I mean, that's something that could kind of mess with that ecosystem, within that locker room. And when you look at it like that, I mean, it does kind of make a lot of sense as to why maybe they didn't want to bring, or they kind of said thanks but no thanks when it came to a guy like Mike McDaniel.
Yep. No,
Um,
totally. That totally makes sense, and that's kind of what I kind of arrived at similar conclusions in our last week's episode of
mhm,
probably wanted to change the kind of organizational philosophy from a little more very smash mouth to a little more finesse.
yeah,
And Dan Campbell probably wasn't about it. Didn't want to change that. So
yep.
yeah, wasn't a good fit. I still think it's hilarious that he ended up with Jim Harbaugh, but
It's probably an even
whatever.
worse fit and with the Chargers. But get your popcorn ready because
Yeah, you
oh
have
my
the
God.
autistic dweebish, um, you know, Jim Harbaugh, which everybody here locally is familiar with, kind of his idiosyncrasies, and you know, Mike McDaniel in the same room. That's an interesting hire. I wonder. I
Well,
gotta wonder if
I
that
mean, you're
decision was made for Harbaugh,
you're going
not
from a
by
guy because they're going from Greg Roman to Mike McDaniel,
Harbaugh.
and that's great. That is great. I love it. I can't wait to see that this up. You know what? I want the Chargers to be on what was that show called on HBO?
Hard
Um,
Knocks.
Hard Knocks. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be some good TV. Watching Jim Harbaugh and Mike McDaniel, that whole dynamic and how that works out. Now, Dorf, this final thing for the quick hits, and I know you have a lot of opinions on it. Um, I know, I know.
Precisely zero.
Precisely zero, but maybe this will be a learning experience for you.
All right.
Um, USL United Soccer League announced plans for their Division One league, which is set to kick off in 2028. Um, Obviously, this is actually big news because it changes a lot of the landscape when it comes to professional soccer in the United States, from two different standpoints. One, you are putting a Division One league, head to head with Major League Soccer. Um, Second, USL has plans to implement promotion and relegation within this system. Because right now USL is comprised of two professional leagues, USL Championship and USL League One, and one amateur league. This is just on the men's side of things. USL League Two, which, like I said, it's a bunch of amateur teams that play. It's basically like a summer league for that colleges will send some of their college players to. Ironically enough, the women's side of things, USL Super League, they have a Division One league that goes head to head with the National Women's Soccer League, the NWSL. So that's already happening on the women's side of things. But on the men's side of things, we've never seen this happen before. And obviously, what this means for Detroit is Detroit City FC is more than likely going to be included in this new Division One. I know I've heard the owners talk about this as far as being interested in applying to be in the new Division One, which is going to be called USL Premier, and they're going to be taking the namesakes from, the English system. So the top league is going to be USL Premier. The league below that, in the second tier, is going to be USL Championship, which in England it's called the championship, and then the third league below that, the third tier is going to be USL League One, which is again in England League One. Um, so Detroit is, like I said, it makes all the sense in the world for Detroit to do this because obviously early in the show we talked about Detroit being a major media market. In fact, when it comes to MLS, um, they are without just three of the major media markets um, that would comprise their own league. So right now, they are without MLS is without Phoenix, Tampa, and Detroit. Um, Ironically enough, USL Championship has all three of those media markets within their own league. So again, it wouldn't make sense for Detroit or a place like Phoenix, Phoenix Rising, or the Tampa Bay Rowdies to be included in this new USL Premier, and I wholeheartedly believe that that's going to be the case. Second, Detroit is obviously building a new stadium. It's going to be just below 15,000, um, which technically speaking, when you talk about PLS Pro League standards, um, according to the United Soccer Federation or the United States Soccer Federation, in order to be Division One, Dorf, I think you need to have a 15,000 seat stadium.
Probably
Um,
why they designed it that big.
in addition to a bunch of other things like media market size, I know there's ownership percentages that have to be, that you have to meet as
Oh,
well.
there's got to be like business metrics
Sure.
and revenue targets and all that jazz. I'm sure.
Yeah, and at the same time too, I mean, if they're going to implement promotion and relegation, there's going to have to be reforms to the pro league standards in the United States, which I suspect that's going to happen. In some certain aspect too, like pro league standards are kind of a joke, considering waivers are giving out all the time for them, and they're not always followed, whether you're MLS who um, don't um, include all of their pro teams in the United States Domestic Cup, which is the US Open Cup. Um, Technically speaking, if you're a professional team in the United States, you're supposed to compete in the US Open Cup. It's the same as, the FA Cup in England. Um,
Hmm.
you're supposed to compete in this. Well, MLS has been able to circumvent the rules and be like, okay, well, we're MLS and we're not going to be having all of our pro teams play in the US Open Cup because we have all these other cups. We have the Leagues Cup with Liga MX that we have to, undertake. And you know what? We're above, going and playing in 7,000 seat stadiums like Keyworth in Detroit, where Detroit CFC currently play right now. So, um, but anyways, like I said, it is big news, um, because ultimately Detroit is going to have a Division One soccer team, more than likely here in the next couple of years, that are going to be playing in a new, very, very nice facility. Um, that is going to be competing with MLS. And I know a lot of people out there. I've seen some comments already on social media that USL isn't going to be able to compete with MLS. And I mean, realistically speaking, like these first maybe several years, yeah, USL is probably going to be seen as still kind of, the two league to MLS, which is fair. I understand that. The problem though with MLS is how they've approached the media aspect, Dorf. Like before, you turn on the channel, they had TV deals much like we see in Major League Baseball or the NBA or um, the NHL, where you'd have like these local deals. Now they're behind basically like a paywall with Apple TV, so it's very very hard to catch MLS games, especially if you are,
Yeah.
if your team like, if you're a fan of the Columbus Crew um, or Inter Miami or, Red Bull New York. It's hard. It's hard to catch their games. So, and USL is very accessible when it comes to that. They already have a contract with CBS Sports. They have nationally televised games on ESPN2. They have it on CBS Sports, nationally televised games. So it's very, very accessible. They're on ESPN Plus, which is, it's a reasonable deal to purchase ESPN Plus. Um,
Mhm.
so I mean, I can from an exposure standpoint, I can see USL making some waves, especially, implementing Pro Rel, where it kind of changes the whole dynamic of the game itself and, and what games matter and the games, if you're a last place team fighting to stay in the first tier, I mean that becomes a massive game. It becomes an exciting game as opposed to okay, the last place team in the MLS playing at the end of the season. Who gives a shit about it? Um, so again, it's an interesting dynamic. It's an interesting thing that's going on. Um, and just again, the way that the USL is made up too, you have a bunch of independent teams, Dorf. Um, it's not like the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, or the NBA where they're franchises. These are independent
Or
teams that
the,
operate.
the MLS where they're all under the one corporate umbrella.
Yep,
Yep.
where it's a single entity. Yeah, so it's a very different structure now. USL too has their own problems right now. They are in a CBA negotiation, and I don't. And this is the thing that is going against them right now. It's a very serious thing going against them too, where they don't mandate health insurance for their teams. So there are teams right now in USL Championship that don't have health insurance for their players. So pro players on some of these teams,
So that
Dorf,
doesn't
have to.
necessarily get them out of their workman's compensation
No, it
requirements,
doesn't.
but
No, it doesn't. And you're right. There's going to be workman compensation, but the thought, the thought of a professional soccer player having to go onto the marketplace to get their health insurance is kind of extraordinary when you think about it. Um,
yeah.
so again,
Or hopefully your spouse has good insurance at their job.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's not the only thing. I know, and it's the same thing with any CBA. They're fighting for more pay. They're fighting for guaranteed contracts because there was a team this past year in North Carolina that basically said, "All right, you know what? We're not playing this upcoming season." It's North Carolina FC. Um, we're not playing this year. We're going to wait out and apply for USL Premier Division One when that comes about. So all you guys under contract right now, well, now those contracts are void. We don't have to pay you anything. Um, what the players are fighting for now too is they want those contracts guaranteed. So if something like that were to happen, and again, it is still soccer in the United
They're not
States.
they don't want to be unsecured creditors in a bankruptcy. I get it. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And still within soccer in the United States, things are still shaky. It's not like in England in the Premier League where of course if you sign a contract you're going to get paid that entire amount of money. If you're in the NFL, well, NFL is a bad example because contracts in there are not guaranteed. If you're a baseball player,
Yeah.
you're going to get the entirety of that money, basically no matter what happens.
As long as you
So
don't get thrown in jail. Yeah, pretty much.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
So
as long
again,
as you don't get thrown in jail, you're fine.
yep. So yeah, again, exciting. Something to keep an eye on too as we move forward. Detroit City's entering their final year in Keyworth right now, but who knows where they're going to be playing next year, what stadium, because they're supposed to be playing in their new stadium, but they haven't exactly broken ground on it yet. Um, and a 15,000 seat stadium, you
Better
got to
hurry.
suspect it's going to take that's going to take some time to build. And Dorf, they haven't done anything with it yet. The hospital, the
Do
abandoned
they,
hospital that's still
do
there,
they
is
have
still standing.
do they have funding for? Is it funded?
It's supposed to be funded, yeah, yeah. Um, they got
Is any of the money public money, or is it all private?
the vast majority of it is private.
Okay.
There's some tax things in there where they're getting reimbursed on the
Oh,
taxes.
there's tax abatements, I'm sure, but like, is the city of Detroit handing them a check for X million of dollars to help with construction expenses? And the
Um,
political winds have changed, and when it comes time to get the checkbook out, they're balking at it now, despite the promises made before. That's the angle I was going down.
I believe there's going to be some reimbursement, and I'm horrible with the finances and everything of it. I think that there's going to be some reimbursements when it comes to construction costs, because it is brownfield. Um,
Mm.
and it's basically one of those things where, hey, we'll do you guys a solid and we'll take care of
Because
this.
nobody else will develop here, so
Nobody
please do
else will
something.
develop here, so we'll do it. We
Yeah.
just want some compensation in return. We want some breaks in return, to get
Yep.
this, derelict
Happens all the time.
old building out of here and build something that you know, is
Useful.
gonna be useful for something. So,
Yeah.
um, but anyways, though, Dorf, good one tonight. Good discussion tonight. Do you have anything you want to add as we kind of close things up here?
No, man, appreciate you having me again. Once again, this is fun, and I just looked at the clock, and it's funny. Like, hey, we're trying to go an hour. We're almost at two.
Yeah. That's I
Just
know. I
doing.
know. Yeah,
Yep.
it's usually how it goes. So,
Yep.
but yeah, we'll definitely will get you on again. Because yeah, there's some other things we got to talk about, especially as we move on, with this lion season and everything this lion's off season and everything that's going to happen
Mhm.
with the Tigers and Skubal and pitchers and catchers as we kind of you know move along with that. So, but yeah, Dorf, it's great having you on again, and yeah, we'll be talking to you later, and we'll be seeing everybody else later. Have a good night, everybody.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for checking out the latest episode of Detroit City Sportscast. For more of this type of content, go to detroit.themajorsports.com where you can see not only this, but all prior episodes of Detroit City Sportscast, along with our other Majors Detroit content, whether it is the Mulling Over Detroit Sports, any of our post-match recaps, or Make City Make Spence and Channel 451 for our Detroit City-centric content. Additionally, we are on YouTube at The Majors TV. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we're on social media. Twitter and Instagram, we are at TMSNX Detroit. Blue Sky is tmsnxdetroit.bsky.social. Also, we are on Facebook at The Majors Detroit. And if you check out your podcast in audio form, you can find us at The Majors Detroit. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It goes a long way towards helping out everyone here at The Majors Detroit in their efforts. Thanks again for checking this out. Catch you later.